Thank you very much indeed, and thank you very much indeed for inviting me here today. I hope that I'm sorry that my presentation is perhaps not quite where it ought to have been in the agenda, but I was doing other things this morning and wasn't able to get here for my part of the agenda earlier on. I mean, we've had an extremely useful discussion just now about being positive and proactive about the concept of sustainable development, something that the CLA has fought and talked to government about for a long time. My job, in fact, at the CLA is twofold. I provide advice to the members of the CLA on development management. I also provide advice on policy matters, but I also derive my policy lobbying from the nature of the queries that CLA members bring to me. And that has led to me researching, developing and promoting planning policy to successive governments for the last 10 years. And so I am delighted to be here today to talk about the future of farmsteads, what is happening to farming, and what the CLA has done in terms of its lobbying just recently. I've actually been working on lobbying successive governments about deregulating the planning system for the last 10 years, because members have told me from the 300 odd different types of business that they run in rural areas across England and Wales, that they would like to see more deregulation of the planning system within caveats and limitations and conditions. And that led me in 2004 to suggest to the previous administration that perhaps we ought to have more permitted development rights for farmers to change the use of farm buildings at that time specifically for commercial uses, because that was what people were being told to do. They needed to diversify. Now, as you all know, that came into force last year. So it took me, 9 years to achieve that lobbying result. And I don't say that the CLA was obviously the forerunner. We pushed it hard. We were aided by other organisations at the same time. And in my discussions with government, I continually say, well, let's think about other types of permitted development rights. What about the fact that we can't get enough dwellings into our rural areas? What about change of use of farm buildings to dwellings? This was, taken away and thought about, and we had the consultation last October, and we had the government's response and implementation of regulations on the 6th of April this year. Very welcome across the majority of the countryside in England. And I have to say that Wales is looking on with jealousy, because they would very much like a lot of these permitted development rights in rural Wales too. I think I'm disappointed that these new permitted development rights for change of use of farm buildings to dwellings is not available to land managers in designated areas, national parks, areas of outstanding natural beauty, conservation areas and World Heritage Sites. But we'll continue to lobby in the CLA to see whether or not we can change the government's opinion on that at a later date. And indeed, I think they might do. I think what they're looking at is to see the impact of these new permitted development rights, whether it's for commercial uses, whether it's for schools, whether it's for dwellings in undesignated countryside, so to speak, to see what the impact is like, and if the impact is acceptable, then they might change their minds. So that's for the future. But what I've put for you is the CLA's something that we talk about a lot, which is what we call the 9 Fs the countryside provides. And is a chart that I take around with me, because sometimes I find that people don't really understand quite what CLA members get up to. And so these are all what we consider the countryside provides by reference to the letter F. And I'm obviously today going to concentrate mainly on farm buildings. But basically what it's talking about is a multifunctional land management. This is what land managers do. They are delivering a series of private and public goods and services. And in the public goods department, we're clearly talking about delivering a landscape, both environmental and cultural, very important for the Kent guidance, biodiversity, water, soil, all those sorts of things. But they're not free goods. They cost money to deliver, and that cost falls mainly on the land manager. This means that they must fund these public goods from alternative sources of income. They must find alternative sources of income rather than just from farming, which comes back to diversification. And government has been asking land managers to diversify for many, many years. Nothing's changed. We're still being asked to diversify. But farming returns are reducing, they're volatile. Farming commodities and prices on the world market are going up and down all the time. Environmental payments under CAP reform are reducing. And there is effectively a gross reduction in the provision of environmental and cultural landscape services in terms of payments for those services, which could be a disaster for rural landscape and landscape. We have long promoted the need to take a balanced approach to sustainable development and its three pillars, and my group will have heard me saying that, these sustainable development has three pillars, they're mutually dependent on each other. And this concept of sustainable development is no less important for our landscapes and our cultural heritage and our important traditional buildings. And so therefore we've always said that the future of our landscapes and the economic success of our rural areas are inextricably linked. A well-managed landscape, such as you will find in the High Weald and in Kent, enriches the nation's heritage, but it's also an attractive backdrop for much needed inward investment in terms of tourism and leisure activities and economics, jobs and homes. The environmental value of the environmental value of a habitat or a landscape or a historic building must be underpinned either by a public payment for the delivery of public goods or services, or by an economic use. Similarly, policies to conserve the richness of our flora and fauna and landscape must work with, not against, the grain of rural businesses, and must be underpinned by evidence and sound science. And I think the evidence today we're seeing is to Kent guidance, useful evidence that underpins what we need to achieve in terms of delivering sustainable converted buildings. But as we all know, and I think we've all said today, probably, and I'm repeating something you've probably already said today or heard today, the countryside is dynamic and our landscapes are no less subject to change than townscapes. Rural development must include some development, which means change. And if we stifle change, whether it's agricultural, diversification, housing, local employment, tourism, then our landscapes cease to function as economic and social entities. And the associated environmental and landscape contributions die with them. And they have to, our landscapes and our businesses have to evolve to be able to adapt to new challenges such as climate change or the current global financial crisis. Not only does the world need to develop alternative mechanisms to produce energy to which the contribution of renewables is vitally important, but in addition the countryside provides the mechanism by which our valued flora and fauna are able to migrate to new habitats. And land managers need to adapt their businesses to cope with new species and diseases and to adapt their farm buildings to find alternative uses for them. So I think what I would say is that if farmers have to maximise all the opportunities for earning income from all the land uses that they can, they must therefore make the fullest use of all their assets at their disposal. This means they must make full use of their buildings, their plant, their equipment, their vehicles, whatever, their entrepreneurial skills. This is diversification. And faced with declining returns to agriculture, many have already branched out into other areas of activity, including off-farm earnings. Given that income from food production is not expected to rise significantly in the foreseeable future, it's important that land managers assist as much as possible in such diversification, and regulatory disincentives are swept away, and that's where my job comes in. I try to ease the passage to produce less burden from a planning perspective. So what I would say is that the permitted development rights, for me, the new permitted development rights for changing use of farm buildings are particularly important. But because our vision for the countryside is dynamic, and because we know that we have to change, I have spent the last few weeks running around England, especially, making presentations to all manner of groups to talk about the new permitted development rights, whether it's about commercial uses or dwellings, and saying actually how, for me, design is probably going to be the main criterion that will say yes or no to your development. Our advice to our CLA members is that design is likely to be the main criterion. Well-designed proposals should, unless of course there are genuine issues around flooding or noise or whatever, they should get approval, and badly designed proposals probably won't. That creates a virtuous circle, in my opinion, in which applicants and planning authorities spend much less resource on arguing about spurious notions of unsustainable or unsustainability, and more resource on good design leading to better and better conversions, which in turn inspire better and better conversions elsewhere. And over time, this should solve a large part of the massive problem of traditional farm buildings at risk from risk of loss. And I think there are thousands of traditional farm buildings out there for which a new economic use is the only way to maintain and reuse them in the longer term. And the recently produced permitted development rights and do allow other uses, and it's the best opportunity for at least 100 years to give a new future to traditional farm buildings, and I welcome the Kent guidance as a framework for achieving these outcomes. So thank you very much.